Now, before we get into what happened at Montauk, we need to talk about a much older story that would eventually become connected to this one, and this is known as the Philadelphia experiment. According to the story, in October 1943, the U.S. Navy conducted a classified experiment aboard the destroyer escort, the USS Eldridge. Now, the goal was to achieve radar invisibility using a technology inspired by what's known as unified field theory. Now, this is the idea that electromagnetic and gravitational fields could be manipulated through intense magnetic fields generated by powerful equipment installed on the ship. Basically, that the electromagnetic and gravitational fields in our actual Earth could be affected if we were able to blast it with a hard enough magnet. And that could, affect, planes and radar and all sorts of different things that would be beneficial during World War II. Now, this experiment allegedly took place on October 28th, 1943. Witnesses claimed that when the equipment was activated, a greenish fog engulfed the USS Eldridge, and the ship, according to the story, completely vanished from the shipyard. And it reappeared briefly in Norfolk, Virginia, roughly 200 miles away, and then returned to Philadelphia minutes later. But when the ship basically reappeared back in Philadelphia, the crew was in terrible condition. According to the stories, some of the sailors aboard the ship were dead, and their bodies were stuck between decks. They were all in these places that basically you couldn't even get to, basically fused into the ship itself. The ones that weren't actually basically reintegrated back into the ship just went crazy, and they experienced this disorientation and memory loss. According to the story, some crew members allegedly vanished entirely, and they were never seen again. And a few reportedly were basically burned, and they were phasing in and out of visibility. Now, it sounds crazy, okay? And the main source of this story was Carlos Miguel Allende, who is also known as Carl Allen, who sent a letter to the astronomer and UFO researcher Morris K. Jessup. But the issue is that Allende provided no evidence. And his letters were filled with unusual capitalization and cryptic language and references to Einstein's work that was kind of misunderstood or just sort of made up. I mean, in the letter, Carlos says, "I have read your book, The Case for the UFO, with great interest, and I feel that you are going to go down in history as the first man to prove to the world that flying objects are real and that we can travel by them. I know this to be a fact because in October 1943, the Navy made a ship invisible and it disappeared from Philly and only appeared in Norfolk, Virginia, and then back again in a few minutes. This was done using Einstein's unified field theory and by wrapping the ship in powerful electromagnetic fields." He goes on to say, "The result was complete invisibility to the human eye, but what they had not counted on was that the crew of the ship was affected terribly. Some went insane. Some, as I know, were found embedded into the steel of the ship. Some were alive, but their bodies were half in and out of the metal of the ship. It was horrible. Others simply disappeared. It was a shocking experiment and was never repeated, and the Navy hushed it up, of course." He even continues the letter and says, "I was there on a merchant ship close by, and we saw the whole thing. Greenish fog arose around the ship, and the ship disappeared. And when it returned, some men were screaming as if they were being burned alive, and others were frozen in place. I will never forget it." Now, it sounds crazy, but I'm just telling you what the letter said. After receiving the letter, Jessup actually started to speak with Carlos and reached out to him asking for any evidence or any other supporting research that could support this claim, but he was unable to recall any specific dates or news reports of the incident or anything like that. Now, the U.S. Navy has repeatedly and officially denied that this Philadelphia experiment had ever occurred, and no Navy records show any evidence of such an experiment, no missing crew, no classified projects matching the description, the ship logs placing the USS Eldridge in New York waters at the same time of this, supposed event that happened in Philadelphia. And despite the lack of evidence, the Philadelphia experiment actually introduced a lot of key themes that would resurface decades later. This was, secret military tech, invisibility, teleportation, catastrophic consequences when humans interfere with, physics, all that kind of stuff. Now, keep these themes in mind because they're going to come back with this Montauk Project. So, when the Air Force closed Camp Hero, this is the one all the way at the end of Long Island in 1981, the base didn't immediately transfer to civilian control. So for several years, it sat abandoned. Local residents would see security guards like maintenance crews, but the site remained basically off limits to the public. This period when the base was not active by the military, but also not open to the public, became all the juice needed for speculation. You had a lot of independent researchers and conspiracy theorists that started to theorize that the radar equipment and the underground facilities weren't actually abandoned. Instead, they claimed that the Air Force withdrawal was actually just a cover story for something more secretive. First off, Camp Hero's remote location in Montauk made it ideal for, classified work, right? It's close to the city, but still very far away from, people milling around. Second, this massive underground tunnel network from World War II provided this kind of like a ready-made facility for these covert operations. And third, the base's radar equipment and the connection to SAGE suggested that it had some capacity for electromagnetic research. Now, a lot of researchers also point to the base's proximity to Brookhaven National Laboratory, which is about 50 miles west. Now, Brookhaven was the real nuclear research facility involved in particle physics and obviously had historical ties to government research. And fun fact, actually, Brookhaven is where one of the first particle accelerators, called the Cosmotron, was actually created in 1952, which, of course, didn't help any of the accusations. Now, conspiracy theorists speculated that Brookhaven scientists might have used Camp Hero as this remote testing site for their more dangerous experiments that couldn't be conducted near, very populated areas. Now, the theories began by claiming that this camp was a mind control experiment, essentially like the new MK Ultra after MK Ultra was done, and then they swapped it to weather manipulation, and then it made the biggest leap of all, obviously, to, massive scale time travel. Now, these ideas circulated in small circles and through like the pre-internet, kind of conspiracy world throughout the 1980s, and they've remained largely underground, no pun intended, until one person decided to turn all of these theories into a complete story: the Montauk Project. Now, Preston B. Nichols was an electrical engineer living on Long Island who became interested in electromagnetic research and radio technology. But in the early 1980s, according to his later claims, he began experiencing unusual memories and psychological phenomena that he couldn't explain. Now, Nichols said that these symptoms led him to, seeking professional help. He went to therapy and meditation, and he recovered suppressed memories of actually working at Camp Hero between 1971 and 1983. He claimed he had been recruited to work on a classified project involving mind control and electromagnetic manipulation and eventually time travel, all conducted at the underground facility beneath the decommissioned base. So, in 1992, Nichols co-authored the book, The Montauk Project: Experiments in Time, with Peter Moon, a paranormal researcher. Now, this book became the foundation of this modern Montauk legend. It laid out a detailed narrative of what supposedly happened at Camp Hero in the 70s, and according to Nichols, the Montauk Project was divided into several phases, each building on the previous one. The initial phase supposedly ran from 71 to 73 and focused on mind control. Nichols claimed that the project was a continuation of CIA programs like MKUltra, but it used advanced electromagnetic technology instead of drugs. And its main goal was to basically use radio waves to influence human thoughts and behavior. Now, Nichols described these massive rooms filled with transmitters and amplifiers and computer systems that could target individuals and broadcast even wider areas. And the equipment supposedly consisted of modified radar transmitters based on the old SAGE systems. And it also had reconfigured broadcast frequencies that could not only affect, brain activity, but even induce emotional states such as fear or calmness or aggression just by adjusting the frequencies and the modulation of the transmitted signals. Now, the second phase introduced what Nichols basically called the Montauk chair. Now, the most detailed and frequently discussed piece of this alleged technology in the entire story is the Montauk chair. Now, according to Nichols, the Montauk chair was built around 1974. It was described as kind of like a specialized seat, so almost like a dentist chair, basically, surrounded by all these electromagnetic coils, specifically 3 sets of delta T coils arranged in a triangle around where the subject would sit. The chair also featured a hood or a helmet that would fit over the subject's head, all lined with all these sensors and coils. Now, Nichols claimed that the purpose of the chair was psychic amplification. The theory was that human thoughts produce this electromagnetic signal, but it's a weak signal. And if those signals could be detected, amplified, and then broadcast, see where I'm going? A person's thoughts could then manifest, physical effects. Now, here's how Nichols described the process. A psychically sensitive individual, basically someone who scored high on ESP tests or demonstrated, these telepathic abilities, would sit in the chair. The sensors in the helmet would then detect their electromagnetic patterns produced by their brain activity, and then these signals would be fed into a computer system, then translate the brain patterns into a format that could be amplified, and the amplified signals would then be broadcast through the chair's coils and then through the base's, more powerful transmitters. And when this worked successfully, the psychic's thoughts could then manifest in a bunch of different ways. One was thought materialization. The subject could supposedly think of an object, say a chair, a hammer. and then it would physically appear nearby, pulled from some other location or even some other timeline. Now, I know this is crazy. This is just what Preston Nichols wrote in his book. Another thing that he says can happen with this, psychic amplifier is mind projection. Now, the subject's consciousness could be projected to a different location. They could see what was happening miles away or even in different time periods, though their body was still in the chair. Basically, like a scientific version of like remote viewing. And then finally, there is time portal generation. This was described as the most advanced technique. And basically, if the subject focused on a specific time and a place while in the chair, the equipment could supposedly generate what Nichols called a time vortex, or like a time tunnel. And basically, this is like an opening in space-time that connected the Montauk facility to another time period completely. Now, Nichols claimed that the computer system was using a process to amplify these signals, and it was based on technology by Dr. John von Neumann. This was a mathematician who worked on early computing systems and one of the key architects of the Manhattan Project, the thing that, made the nuclear bomb.